but I'm respectful, that I'm not going to presume, because I think I need to be as careful about my life that God is about me. God cares for me. I need to care for me.
Amen.
And not just presume, oh, well, if something goes wrong, I can fix it. And it's like, there's a sense where I need to love me the way God loves me. And God only wants good for me. So I need to only want good for me, which also means making sure I look after myself and I'm healthy in everything I do.
I was just really had it on my heart, this oneness and this union with all of humanity, and even within ourselves, our spirit, our body, and our soul being one, and honoring and appreciating and having gratitude to the Father for how He's created us. What stirred my heart, Mike, was how Father created man, created Adam, and gave him that right or that privilege or that honor in partnering with him to name all the animals in Genesis 2. And I was thinking about how even parents will name their children, and what a blessing, what a moment that is. And it almost kind of, names are important. It becomes like who you are. A lot of times you'll hear somebody's name and you'll be like, oh my gosh, that name fits you. So I just wanted to get your perspective on how Father co-labored with Adam and allowed Adam, brought all the animals in creation past Adam to say, go ahead and name it, and what your perspective is and how we are to work with creation.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I look at it in sense of a name giving something identity, but also a name gives it a form that then the creative process for those animals was Adam's imaginative expression of being a creator in the image of God, rather than God brought animals already preformed and he just named them the way he wanted to name them. So I think there was a creative process in the naming in which Adam, being made in the image of God and therefore creative, was able to choose a name which actually produced the form. So it was a creative process, not just a naming process of, well, I'm giving it this already a name that already existed, like a giraffe. No, it almost like God had something in a form that then actually Adam then formed. And I think I like that idea,
Yes.
in that I think it shows that what Adam did was in union with the Father, so they chose, rather than, well, Adam chose independently of God. No, Adam chose in relationship with God. So Adam didn't do anything. It was like Jesus only doing what he saw the Father doing. Adam reflected the Father's heart in choosing the name, which brought about the form, which was the Father's desire anyway. So they did it together. So there was this cooperation, interaction between the two that brought about the way the animals are. And I like the fact that you are joined to the Lord and you're one spirit with him. And then it's almost like, well, there's no need to differentiate between what I'm doing creatively and what the Father's doing creatively, because we are one and we are in union. And I like that when I looking to engage creatively about anything, I'm brooding with within the Father's heart to do that. I'm not saying, oh, great, I'm just going to go and do this. I want to be in that place where the energy is coming from my resonating with the Father's heart, where I become a voice, his voice, and I speak creatively with his voice, that then light responds to me because I'm speaking in the way that they know it's the Father's voice, even though it's coming out of my mouth, if you like. And again, I think it's a sign of oneness, sonship. You know, we are sons, and sons reflect the Father. And in the creative way, that gives us a huge amount of creative license to do things the way God made us, but out of the Father's heart, which is why we're all uniquely and wonderfully made. And therefore we do things uniquely and wonderfully, you know, which is great. You know, it's such a awesome how God has worked it all out this way, that we can do things seemingly our choice, but they're actually his choice anyway. But the way we do it is reflecting our uniqueness. Doesn't have to be done as clones. You know, it's like God says, I'd like you to make a red car, but he doesn't give you any actual schematics of what the car will look like. So you get a billion people producing a billion different cars, but they're all red. But then he'll say to someone else, I want you to produce a silver car or a red car or a black car or a green car or whatever. And the way in which it gets out work, it's like, yes, it's the Father's intention, but the expressive creativeness comes from out of our being made in his image as a son, which I love that. You know, I love the way God does not prescribe how we do something. You know, is there's so much creative license in there for us to learn. And one of the things the Father said to me is that he's actually left a lot of things unfinished for us to finish. And I was like, because I asked him one day in quite a questioning way, well, why didn't you make enough of them beings? Because there wasn't enough guardian beings. And I was like, well, why didn't you make enough? And he said, well, because we've left a lot for you to do and to finish as our sons. You know, and I thought, oh, so there's a lot of more creative expression that he has designed for us to have, because he's not done everything, you know, for us, but he's wanting to do everything with us, which is great, you know.
Isn't that a lot about the restoration of all things, even the restoration of sonship? You know, where the first thing the enemy goes after as a son is our identity. You know, it says in the word that Satan went after Jesus, says, if you are the Son of God. So in that fullness of sonship, that co-creation, that co-union, that co-laboring with Father comes out from his heart, like you said, an outbirthing of things from his heart, but in our unique flavor, because we each have a unique expression of that.
Absolutely. Yeah. And Jesus obviously demonstrated that in that he healed people in so many different ways. Yeah, it was, even in that, it was a creativeness about how he chose to lay hands on some and speak to others and anoint others with spit and other things, and just speak the words even if they weren't even present in his presence, or ask people to go and walk to a place and on the way they would get healed. You know, so many different ways, which again I think reflects his relationship with the Father and the Father's trust in him as a son, to not have to give him a set of detailed instructions that you have to do it this way and this is the right way. You know, there's no right or wrong way when you're doing an expression of the Father's heart. There's just the way we choose to do it. And I love that. When I started to, God started to rewire my mind and start to deconstruct my thinking, particularly around linearity and linear thinking and the sort of eternal now perspective of things. One of the things he showed me was the choices we have creatively. And I was like, which one should I choose? There's so many possibilities here. Which one's the right one? Mm-hmm. Because I was still conditioned by there will only be one right way that I must find, otherwise I'm going to get it wrong. And actually he said they're all right. And I was looking at it and he said, well, are you not here with me? And is this not me expressing my desire. Any one of these is an expression of my desire. You just choose one, you know, and it was almost like, then you go beyond. It says, and actually it's not just limited to the things you see. You can choose beyond this again, you know, be creative in your choice. That for me was sort of one of the, you know, sort of milestones of my journey, when I realized that there's not only one way to do something and you must get it right, or you will be, in some way, God will be disciplining you, punishing you, you know, if you don't get it exactly the way he wanted in that way, you know. So that was quite a challenge at the time. And just to say that God enjoys all of them, you know, and every possibility for what could happen next exists until we choose one, and then he celebrates in our choice, you know. And if we do choose to do something which is not a reflection of his desire, then he wants to bring good even out of that choice, because he's so good and so loving and so gracious and merciful and kind, you know. So, yeah, awesome.
I think sometimes that kind of cripples me in life, like when I'm writing and I feel like I want to choose the right topic, the right words, what's this chapter, and so forth. And sometimes even painting, I've got blank canvases and I have a million things I could paint. What do I choose? But I find myself always saying, I want to do what you want me to do. So I think knowing that nothing is the wrong choice. But along those lines, I published a book in 2017, and I've since changed quite a bit about what I believe. And I was wondering, you know, there's part of me that wants to go back and just change this 2 lines that I've got in there. And the line that's bothering me is, at that time, I did believe that a person's choice about God ended when they died, and that, you know, that choice was, you know, so important to make while you're still alive.
Yeah.
Now I know that we have life beyond the death of our physical body. And so do I go back and change that? Do I leave it be and just, maybe that would be, I don't know. So do you go back?
Yeah. I mean, I have something similar in that, obviously, over the 10 years or so that I've been doing this, a lot of my thinking has changed and my beliefs have changed. Where that reflects my journey, I've left it, because other people will probably be on the same journey, and therefore they will probably relate to where that is on the journey. If it's something which I now believe is totally contradictory to who God is, then I would change it. So in that instance, if I had said something like that, which I might have done, but I didn't really talk about that an awful lot, I guess, in those days anyway, I would probably change it, simply because it's so contradictory to what I believe about God now. Where it's more about the process of my journey of discovering, like, religious mindsets and thinking, I've left most of that. We've probably changed a fraction of the language, where the language may have been confusing, but we've left the journey there, because people might relate to that at the time. Whereas if, you know, if I taught about hell as a concept before, and now I don't believe in that concept, I would have gone back and changed that, because that would have been misrepresenting what I now believe. Whereas a lot of it is just, this is the journey to get where I am now. So I've left the journey so people can find their own way on the journey. But there are certain things, you know, I would probably change if it was a misrepresenting, because I don't want to misrepresent God now.
Right.
My understanding of various doctrines, okay, if they don't misrepresent God, you know, in a way that would confuse people, or maybe people might read that and have the wrong view of God, then I'm okay with it. But if they do, I will probably change it. It's
Okay.
difficult to change videos, though, of course.
Right.
Yeah.
I don't think I mentioned hell in particular. I had an experience that it was kind of the first of its kind, where I was taken into heaven, but I sensed a definite this atmospheric change, is the only way I can say it, is that I absolutely I knew who I was, but I had no sense of any earthly ties. And the atmosphere was one where I knew that God was God. And what I felt like was, if you didn't know that God was God before having an experience, you would definitely know you were in the presence of God. That sounds confusing, I know.
Yeah.
But then I did write one line that I felt like it was important that you knew God before you died.
Well, it is important. So in that sense, it is still important. I would rather everyone knew God before they died, if they were going to die, because then most of them wouldn't need to die. It'd be a great thing, you know what I mean? Because bringing immortality to light is like, well, they wouldn't need to die in the first place. But in reality, I would rather people find their relationship with God now, in the here and now, and outwork that in our time and be an example of that now, than have to wait until afterwards. So if you've not mentioned what that meant, then it's still true. I would rather people choose to find their relationship with God absolutely before they die, because they're going to enjoy the benefit of it, and the world is going to be a better place because of them embracing and being the light, than if they remain in darkness and are not able to be expressing the light as they could do. So no, I wouldn't say that that's there's anything wrong in that, at all, because it's still true, isn't it?
Yeah. Okay.
I would still absolutely want that to happen. And people use that as a red herring. So, well, if it doesn't matter, people will find God after they die anyway. What's the point of sharing the good news? Well, because I want them to experience God now.
Yeah.
How selfish to have something so good and not share it with people and want them to experience it. And I think, well, why are you sharing the gospel then? Only because it's going to save people from hell, rather than give them eternal life now and the experience of God now? Surely that's the way we should be focusing on the positive of the good news message, not on a perceived negative.
Right.
But then perceived negative uses fear. A perceived positive actually is usually an expression of love.
Mm-hmm.
And which is more reflective of God, fear or love? And I think that for me is really what expresses how people present either what appears to be good news or what appears to be bad news. They think they're presenting good news, but they're really not, when they're making the negative their perspective. You're going to be saved from hell. I mean, someone, I think, asked me a question on YouTube the other day. Well, if forgiveness is for everybody, well, what am I forgiven for? What is it that I'm forgiven for? If there's nothing held against me, how would I be forgiven? Well, in reality, it's the process of holding nothing against you that is forgiveness. That's the reality. You don't have to think about anything you've done. It's just the state of mind that is revealed, really, when you think of it that way. It's almost sort of like, well, if there's nothing held against me, then there's nothing to forgive me for. And I can understand where that's coming from, but in reality, it's thinking of forgiveness of doing something wrong, or a realization of who you actually are that you didn't know, and I think because that makes a lot more sense to me, because it isn't focusing on the negative. God has put things are wrong, understand everything as far as the east is the west, so we can't find it. It's like it's gone, it's removed. But religion keeps bringing back a sin consciousness, as if sin was a verb of doing, where sin is actually a noun. It's something that we have rather than something we do. So we have lost identity. You know, that is the actual reality of what the word means. But we've turned it into a verb of doing something bad that God doesn't like, and then God will punish, because unless you ask him for forgiveness, then he won't punish you. Right. Well, God is already declared as innocent, so there is nothing to forgive. We're already forgiven. That doesn't mean that we need forgiveness ongoingly. What we need is a realization of where our lost identity is not operating, where it's bringing us outworking that in a wrong way. You know, so what we do isn't a reflection of who we are. It's a reflection of the wrong image of who we are. And of course, that needs to be brought back to the right image. So the forgiveness thing is Jesus already pronounced as innocent, righteous, justified, already done. We shouldn't be focused on the negative, you know, but religion focuses on the negative all the time because it's all about behavior, acceptance through behavior.
Right.
Which really is the problem, that people then live in guilt, shame, and condemnation all the time because they're never good enough, because they can't keep up that behavior in their own strength. But if you kept focusing on who you are, then you become an expression of who you are. And if I am the righteousness of God in Christ, then of course I'm going to be an expression of righteousness. Yeah, but I think that doesn't really keep the religion going. And I think that's the problem. You know, religion needs sin consciousness to maintain its validity for some reason. Because a religion is always about doing something to earn something with God. Well, if you've already got everything that God intends you to have, then there's nothing to earn. It's all received freely. Therefore, you don't need the religion to do the works.
Right.
You know, so that it is very much sin focused because of that. You know, and if we're grace conscious and our whole way of thinking is not about what we do, but who we are, and if that is a realization of who we are from God's perspective, then of course we're going to become who we are. You know, we'll be like that which we behold. And if I keep looking into his face, I'm going to see the image of what he says I am. And it's so much easier to be that, you know. But it is a challenge, you know, it's a challenge because our minds are being renewed. They've not been renewed. You know, that's the thing. People, you know, God has done everything, but I have not realized it yet. As soon as I realize it, it changes me. So the more realization I can get of my actual identity, the more change and transformation takes place. Yeah, which is wonderful, really, because it means I just need relationship for change, transformation. I don't need a whole load of dead works. Yeah. Because that's what sin consciousness produces, dead works. A work which has got no life in it to try and get you to receive something that's already yours because you earn it. You know, all religion is about earning what's already yours. You know, if you know what's already yours, you don't have to earn it. It's free. It's given you. It's already yours. Right. You know. Yeah.
Yeah, Mike, it's interesting. That is part of the freedom, isn't it? That Jesus destroyed the power of sin and death.
Yeah.
Even your comment, excuse me, that if you were to die, it just seems like there's been such an awakening that we don't need to agree with death. You know, you've had those short clips of immortality and being able to be renewed in mind, body as well, and spirit continuously through the outpouring of Father. Can you talk even a little bit more about immortality and how your mindset has expanded into what that'll look like, and how we as sons even are agreeing more and more with freedom from death?
Yeah. I think when you look at the mindset that needs to change around it, we've been so conditioned that death is a promotion to another realm and to another state of being. And that's a good thing. That's what it's been presented as. Whereas when it talks about Jesus bringing life and immortality to light through this good news, and Jesus saying, well, you don't need to die in John 6, you know, you don't need to die. Because most people have died, it's so hard to believe that. Mm-hmm. You know, and therefore our whole understanding that, well, everyone from virtually as soon as they can talk are conditioned with, well, you're going to die one day. It's like, you know, that's just ingrained into everybody, isn't it? So it's not just a religious concept, it's a societal concept. Well, death is inevitable. Of course, some people try and cheat death through their own efforts. So they will, you know, the eternal flame and all the stuff, you know, eternal potion or whatever that you can take, and there's all sorts of stories in there. But people's pursuit, I mean, those now who die, you know, their heads chopped off and put into cryostasis or something, so one day their consciousness can be revived. I mean, they're all trying nanotechnology, trying to eliminate death. All of that is obviously our best efforts to do it, rather than actually just realizing that death has no part in us. But obviously we have to deal with the physical body, because our soul and body our soul and spirit aren't going to die anyway. It's only the physical body that's the issue. Therefore we sort of, oh, well, you know, from dust to dust, you know, well, you're going to go back to the dust one day, as if that was God's intention from the first place. Well, no, it wasn't. So Jesus sort of rebalanced that and said, well, you don't need to die.
Amen.
You know, if you eat my flesh and drink my blood. Now, again, that's become ritualized into, well, only if you take communion as a ritual. And then it's been spiritualized as well, because it's really only means spiritually you won't die. Well, actually, it's physically, but it really wasn't. When he talked about eating his flesh and drinking his blood, it was a full embracing of who he was. Obviously not literally eating his flesh and drinking his blood. And we're sort of taking on communion as a sort of an element of that, but it goes beyond just sort of communion as a thing into living with his breath, his life. You know, everything about him is life. There is no death in him. And that takes on a different connotation to it, I feel. Now, obviously, our physical body may have things attached to it and within our DNA, which are reflecting of our earthly inheritance rather than our heavenly one. So that does need changing. So it's not just a mindset change. There's also a physical transformation of any death within our cells. And hence then our cells need to be renewed and not destroyed. And therefore the ability of our cells to renew themselves need to be restored. Therefore they need to learn how to communicate what it is that brings about that change and restoration. And then the things within our cells that within normal sort of thoughts will lead to death, all of those need to be dealt with physically, as well as just, you know, well, how? Well, yes, you can see it as, well, I'm breathing in his life all the time, and therefore I'm in a state of continual renewal and restoration. But does that mean that we will have the same physical body forever? No, because I think there's a limitation to our physical body that Adam didn't have, in that his spirit was around his body, not the other way around. So there needs to be a restoration of the balance of relationship between spirit, soul, and body that God intended, that our bodies and spirit and soul would come back into the correct balance and harmony and design that God had for it. So Jesus, when he died, his physical body died, he had a resurrection body. that seem to have certain abilities that may have been different from his physical body while he was alive. But he had the capacity to choose to do the things that afterwards was different than he did before. He still moved through people. He still disappeared. He still was able to do the things, but his body was different. And I do think there is a transformation of the body that is taking place and will take place that will bring about a different relationship between spirit and soul and body than we have now. So you could say he had a resurrection body. We died with him and we were raised with him, and we're in the process of that being fully formed in us. But our thinking can stop it. As a man thinks in his heart, so is he. So if you think in your heart that death is the answer, then you will probably die. So our thinking does have to be in alignment for our, I guess, for the outworking to take place. I would say that that's probably where I am with it. It's not just about, well, I just think of it and it's going to be. I think there's a process of our whole body being renewed, but there's also a process of the relationship between spirit, soul, and body also being transformed into what it should have been. And that might have different ways of outworking. I don't know. You know, do I have a resurrection body now? Yes, in one sense, because I have died and was resurrected with him.
Amen. Amen.
But in another sense, my mind is coming into an agreement with what that means, and my thinking has an effect on that. Hence the renewal of my mind to agree with God about my physical state needs to take place. You know, but there's not been a lot of sort of history of teaching that or experiencing it that people can draw on. Right. You know, to say, well, where's the testimony? Right. Now, there are some people who are alive after hundreds of years because they have sort of embraced some of this, but then where are they? People talk about them, there are not many people have met them, you know, so it's quite difficult, you know, to sort of put a hard, fast thing on it. So I do believe that it starts with the belief and then brings about transformation of the physical nature of our being, so that the cells of our being, all of our thing, is in alignment with God's intention. So yeah, that's really where I would be with it. Now, then that poses the question, well, what about aging? You know, are we going to age? Well, if aging has a consequence with death, then we should not be aging to bring death. Jesus aged from a baby to a full-grown adult. What would he have done had he not have moved into a resurrected body? You know, we don't know because he didn't do it, you know. So there's a sense where nothing in our body should hinder us being able to fulfill our destiny in God. And there may be some that God takes, like Enoch and Elijah, that are just translated into another state of being without having to go through physical death. You know, and we don't know who would be those that would not remain here because they have finished their task here and move on into another perspective, like Enoch and Elijah and others have done. You know, we don't know yet. You know, some people might know that there's a time when they're not going to be here, you know, but we don't need to put death on that time. You know, there may be that I fulfilled all that I need to fulfill. So therefore, this part of my destiny is fulfilled and I don't need to be here any longer. Therefore, I will just go to be there. So there will be a transformation, I think, in the nature of our physical being. at some stage or in process, whichever way it is going. It's a challenge, though. It is a challenge because you can't really sort of point to anyone who's alive who can say it, because well, they could die tomorrow, you know what I mean? Well, I'm immortal. Well, yes, at this moment you can say that, but if you die tomorrow, that wouldn't work. So no one can, you can't testify really to it, because we could all testify because we're all living. Right. None of us have died yet. So, but we know people who have. So that gives us the, oh, well, people have died, and people look at all those people who've died. You know, that's wrong. So we've got to really transform our whole thinking away from the norm. Otherwise, that the norm will dictate what we think of the future. And obviously we don't want our future being determined by what's happened in the past in that way. So,
Yeah, because obviously death has the testimony. People have died. People die in our families. We know our grandparents or aunts or uncles or cousins or whatnot, and friends and whatnot have died. And you'll see the news report of, this is the oldest person alive in the United States. He's 120 whatever or whatnot. So you hear that word as that is the truth, when sounds like, from what I'm perceiving and hearing from you, Mike, it's about that belief in our word and how we speak over our body and what we believe, and even stand on the truth that Jesus did destroy the power of death. So I don't need to agree with death as a reality over my physical body.
Yeah, and I think there's a sense where we have to be untethered from time as an ability to lead to death. There are all sorts of thinking and things that we would just have probably been programmed and conditioned by, that we need to have our thinking changed about. And there's lots of little things. So, you sort of a thought that, oh no, I'm not agreeing with that thought. Yeah, so there is a sort of a bit of a thing that gets uncovered to show us many different areas where we have been tethered to that concept that do need to be changed. I don't think it's enough just to say, oh, I don't believe in death anymore. Just as almost like the power of positive thinking. There's a whole thing around immortality that needs to go with it. And we do need to cooperate with our bodies. Our bodies need to be working together with soul and spirit, so that we're in one ourselves and in oneness and union, which, is again, sort of more than just, well, I just think it and that's it. Now I can choose the reality, but the reality must change me, so that I am aligned to that reality, not just wishful thinking. I think immortality for some people is wishful thinking. I think some indications to it is that you live in health. So for me, I live in health. So that's a good indication to me that I'm not subject to the things that could end up killing me, because I'm living in health and my mindset is health, and I've got 30 years of testimony of health to say, well, I've not been sick for 30 years. In any form of disease or anything like that. But the physical body has some measure of weakness attached to it. In other words, it can be damaged. If I was hit by a car, the physical body, in the laws of physics, would say a harder thing moving at a certain speed has the potential to damage a softer thing that's standing still. So there are laws which you then have to sort of look at, well, how would I deal with that? Well, not standing in front of a car for a start. There's common sense in there as well that we need to be aware of. So there are certain things that I need to be careful about, as well as, well, I'm not going to die from disease or whatever. I'll also be careful not to fall off the top of a building and hit the ground. Now, on the way down, I might be choosing a reality that I might bounce, rather than hitting the ground and being squished. So there's a sort of sense where there's a lot that goes with this that needs to be thought about, and our thinking needs to be aligned in all of it, not having an assumption that I'm immune to any physical things, because I'm not. Now, there are things that I can choose if I'm in a conscious awareness of certain things, that I have done, which has meant my physical body has not been affected by certain things. And I think you can, if you're living in a non-linear way, you can see what could happen and choose not to go down that route. Now, I have some experience with that when I was doing some physical manual labor and doing some stuff in my garden, I was in a real state of rest, but I was working really physically hard, But there were certain moments where it was like I could see what was going to happen next if I wasn't careful. So I saw what would happen because I was using a pickaxe. If I hit that spot with the pickaxe, it could rebound back and the point hit me. So I choose not to hit that spot because there was a big rock at that spot. So I shifted where I was going to hit it, and I went behind it and was able to pull the rock out without hitting the rock and causing it to bounce back. That happened in an instant. Like, I saw and didn't hit the rock because I was able to have an insight into what might happen. And a number of times that happened to show me that we can become aware of what is possibilities around us and choose the right ones, not the wrong ones. And I think we should actually cultivate that level of intuition or awareness that can keep us safe in the normal everyday working of life, because there are dangers if I'm not careful. I mean, I do a lot of woodworking and I have got a lot of power tools which are extremely dangerous. I mean, I was cutting some quite small slivers of wood yesterday on my table saw, which I was aware that they're dangerous. So I have the tools that enable me to cut slivers of wood and some jigs that enabled me to cut safely. But yesterday I had, two pieces of hardwood that I wanted to cut down to sort of 6 mil, and 6 mil is probably the smallest I would actually use on a table saw, and I have a gripper thing that enabled me to do it, but I was very careful while I was doing it. And because I've cut my finger on a table saw before, and I know how damaging that can be, so I'm careful. If I'm using other tools, I'm careful because I'm aware of how potentially dangerous they can be. So I've trained myself to be self-aware and careful. I'm not fearful of them, but I'm also aware that they have potential for harm if I'm not careful. And I shared before the last time that I was using my planer and wasn't careful and what it did, so I won't do that again. I've learned from that. Now, again, it didn't take my fingers off and it didn't damage my fingers so badly that they weren't self-repairing, but there's a risk and I need to be careful with that risk. So literally, I'm not going to drive my car like a Formula One racing driver around the streets of where I live or around the country lanes where I live, because on a racing track, there's nothing coming the other way. But on a road, there could be something around that bend that you need to be aware of. So driving at 80 miles an hour, which my car is capable, or whatever, even faster, it would be stupid to do. So I wouldn't do it. And I wouldn't just say, well, I'm immortal. Well, what about the other person in the car that I might actually kill by crashing into them? So that you've got to also have a lot of common sense and the right way of thinking about life, which means you can enjoy it to the full, not be fearful of anything, but be respectful of things which can be dangerous. And most of those things are the things that we've made. You know, I mean, generally speaking, unless I decide to climb a cliff, I'm not likely to fall a great distance. You know, and if I climbed a cliff without a rope, then I would be taking the risk, which I won't do. I mean, I have done in my past a lot of cliff climbing without ropes, which I wouldn't do today, because I'm more respectful today of actually looking after myself, because I care about my being here, fulfilling what I've got to do here.
Man.
And I'm not blasé about it in what I would have been before. You know, I mean, I have done some crazy things in the past because I don't have fear of anything. I don't fear heights. You know, I've done some things on ladders and on roofs that I wouldn't do today. It's not that I'm any less or any more, I'm not afraid, but I'm respectful that I'm not going to presume, you know, because I think I need to be as careful about my life that God is about me. God cares for me. I need to care for me.
Amen.
Mhm.
Yeah, and not just presume, oh, well, if something goes wrong, I can fix it. You know, and it's like there's a sense where I need to love me the way God loves me.
Ooh.
And God only wants good for me. So I need to only want good for me, which also means making sure I look after myself and I'm healthy in everything I do. You know, and there's sort of a balance here, which could be out of balance the wrong way. And a lot of people say, oh, well, I'm immortal. I'm okay. I can do anything. Well, I think you've got to be careful that that doesn't get into presumption in the wrong way, really. You know.
You think, Mike, that ties in with the new heavens and the new earth, and just this transition into this, you know, there's so much talk in the body about this new era. Matter of fact, I was comparing notes with a friend who listens to Ian Clayton. And what's interesting is Ian had this revelation about the East Gate, which is interesting because you'd been talking about the West Gate.
Yeah.
And actually had an activation where engaged and opened the East Gate. And it had to do with our body. It had to do with our words and speaking and being in oneness with creation. Almost in the same way you just talked about with God gave Adam the ability to name, you know, creation, the animals, and it helped. The naming created the identity and the creative ability that he had over his words and over his intention.
Yeah, I do struggle a little bit with sort of this whole thing about new ages and new eras and whatever. I feel that we are maturing, and in our maturity, that opens access to certain things. But that's always been there for everyone. It's not like it wasn't available to anyone right throughout history. And some of the mystics through history have engaged that sort of stuff. Now more people are. Doesn't make it a new age. It just means we're in a more of a realized or understanding of it, but it's always been true. You know, I think revelation is progressive, but it doesn't change the truth. It just means our realization of the truth is now, oh, that's new. No, it's not new. It's just new for me. You know, and I think the gates have been able to be opened all the way through history. It's not just now. But I do believe people are now maturing in sonship to the state that more people are able to access those things because there's more awareness of it. And I think in that activation, they also said you shouldn't open the north, south, and east and west gates. Right. Well, I would not agree with that. I would say you shouldn't open it without a mandate to open it or the maturity to open it, which may have been what he was meaning. But that doesn't mean it can't be opened or shouldn't be opened if you're given a mandate and you're mature enough to do so. So, yeah, I do believe that, you know, we're learning as we're maturing to discover the things that already have existed always. You know, now that appears like we're in a new era or a new age. It just means that we are now mature enough to handle the things that have always been there. And some people have always been able to do that right through history. It's not that just people now can do things with gates, because people have opened those gates before. Yes, sometimes illegitimately. I agree. But it isn't just now, as if we're now, this is a new era that God only intended for those people now. I don't really believe that. I think it's always been available, and for various reasons, most people have not been able to embrace it, but they could have done, and some have, you know. But it is interesting that, you know, again, people are talking about gates, and these gates specifically, in regard to certain things, you know. Now that doesn't mean that that's the only thing that those gates have application for. It may just be that that's the thing that he has been able to have a mandate to engage it for. So again, let's make sure we don't then limit these things to what someone else's experience is, rather than there may be a lot of other experiences that are around those things which are there. Let's make sure we don't limit it to one thing. Yeah, or limit the gates to one gate. Just because the Bible has good things flowing out the east gate doesn't mean that there weren't good things supposed to come out of the west gates in that realm, or the north or the south gates, you know. And I've seen them all open in recent time for a specific purpose, you know. And our relationship to the gates mustn't be on these gates are inanimate and are they just there to obey us, to open or close. They're relational, and we need to engage them with our hearts and cooperate together for their opening and closing in agreement with the Father's hearts and desires, not just sort of open and just tell them what to do as a command or an order, when they were created with the ability to relate to us. And I think relationship is always going to be key to engaging all these things, I think. So.
Do we need to know what we don't know? So if you don't know about these gates, can you still operate with the flowing of them without knowing that? Or do you really need to know about the gate? I mean, let's say God never tells you anything about gates. Like me, I don't know what you're talking about. I think I remember something about these north, south, east, and west gates, but is it possible to operate with what they're releasing without knowing of their opening? Or if you don't know about them, is it just possible you just don't need to know?
I think it's definitely possible you don't need to know everything that's related to outside of your destiny. What would be the point of knowing something just for the sake of it? On the flip side of that is, yes, I think you can benefit without the intimate knowledge of something, because of the relationship you have with God and his desire to bless you. You can be blessed without knowing how the source of blessing works.
Okay.
But if you do know how that source of blessing works, then you can choose to engage that deliberately by intention.
Okay.
God's intention is always good. So you can be blessed by God's intention, even if you don't know how. But if you do know how, you can choose that intention yourself in alignment with the Father's heart. But it doesn't mean, you know, I look back and see God was doing so many things in my life that I wasn't involved in choosing, but he was at work. And I do know some of them. I don't need to know everything. I think of even like thinking about the gateways and in my spirit, soul, body, and how that worked. And it was working, but I didn't know the fullness of it. So some of it was other things were revealed as I went along the journey. Rivers of living water flowing from my innermost being. Well, I didn't even know what my innermost being was. I thought I knew what it was. And then I thought, oh, could it be the garden of my heart? Could it be my first love gate? Whatever. And then I discovered, actually, no, there is a core of my being where spirit, soul, and body are designed to function in that innermost place. Well, I was functioning in it before I knew how to function in it intentionally. So things were still operating in my life, even though I didn't know how. But when I did know how, then I could choose intentionally more. But I wouldn't need to know if I didn't need to use it. You know, so I'm open for whatever the Father wants me to know when I need to know it. And the timing of him showing me things is down to him. You know, and I'm not going to try and seek out hidden knowledge illegitimately, because I think some people are looking in the wrong places for things because they think they need to pursue mystical knowledge rather than enter into the mystery of relationship, which will unveil it.
Yeah.
Relationship is the key, not the pursuit of mysteries.
Yes.
You know, I think that's really important, because I think some people are pursuing the mysteries and could be deceived because they're pursuing it in the wrong way, looking in the wrong sources when it's always going to be in the Father rather than some external source. You know, I don't need some mystical book to give me revelation that the Father can reveal to me, because the mystical book may have all sorts of other stuff attached to it,
Right.
which I wouldn't want. So always safe to engage the Father's heart for the revelation that he will reveal when you need to know it or not. You know, and your spirit knows more than your soul most of the time. You know, which is okay, because sometimes the soul can't handle the knowledge that the spirit has yet. It's not mature enough or able to, which is why things are progressive and not always a download of everything in one go. Hi everyone, we're starting a Patreon page and we would like to invite you to partner with us. You can find us on Patreon at patreon.com/freedomarc. Partner with us in taking the message of God's unconditional love, limitless grace, triumphant mercy to a bigger global audience.